The Sinclair Hotel stood against the November sky like a fortress of wealth and privilege, its limestone facade glowing warm against the bitter Chicago wind. I'd walked past it 1,000 times on my way to Lincoln Park Academy, never imagining I'd actually be climbing its marble steps in a dress I could barely afford. My invitation sat folded in my clutch, the embossed Aurora Foundation seal pressed into cream cardstock. The same seal my father had helped design 20 years ago when he and 3 other doctors founded the organization to provide medical care for underprivileged children. Before the cancer. Before everything fell apart. I'd left Linda with my neighbor Mrs. Chin 2 hours ago, my 8-year-old daughter's face pressed against the apartment window as I walked to catch the bus downtown. She'd wanted to come, to wear the navy dress we'd found at the consignment shop on Clark Street, to see the fancy party her grandfather had helped create. But this wasn't a place for children. This was the Aurora Foundation Gala, where Chicago's elite gathered to write checks and pretend they cared about the causes my father had actually devoted his life to. The kind of event where a single mother elementary school teacher would be examined, judged, and found wanting. The wind cut through my thrift store gown as I reached the entrance. Black crepe, high neckline, long sleeves. Elegant enough to pass if no one looked too closely at the slightly frayed hem or the way I'd had to take it in myself because alterations cost more than the dress. Women in furs and diamonds swept past me, their laughter bright and careless, their heels clicking on marble as doormen rushed to open glass doors etched with Art Deco designs. I joined the line at the registration table, my breath forming small clouds in the November air. Around me, conversations flowed in the easy cadence of people who belonged. Investment portfolios. Vacation homes in Aspen. Children at prestigious boarding schools. The world my father had occupied before his death, the world my marriage to Richard had briefly given me access to, the world that had slammed its doors the moment the divorce papers were signed. Name please. The woman at the registration table looked up from her tablet, her smile professional and distant. Diamond studs caught the light from the chandelier visible through the doors behind her. Her navy suit probably cost more than I made in a month. Tracey Messer. I spelled it for her, watching her manicured finger swipe through the digital guest list. Once. Twice. A small line appeared between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. I'm sorry, I don't see that name. She looked up at me, her expression shifting from professional to apologetic. Are you sure you're registered for tonight's event? The cold sank deeper than the wind. Yes. I received an invitation 3 months ago. My father was Dr. Robert Messer. He was one of the founding members of the Aurora Foundation. I understand, but I don't have you in the system. She turned the tablet toward me as if I needed visual confirmation of my exclusion. Perhaps there was a mistake with the mailing list. If you'd like to purchase a ticket at the door, individual seats are $1,500. $1,500. I made that in 2 weeks of teaching 3rd graders their multiplication tables and how to write persuasive essays. I spent it on rent, groceries, Linda's after-school program, and the endless small expenses that came with raising a child alone. There must be an error. My voice sounded thin even to my own ears. I RSVP'd in September. I have the confirmation email. The woman's expression shifted into something like pity mixed with impatience. Behind me, the line was growing. I could feel eyes on my back, hear the subtle shift in conversation as people began to notice the delay. Ma'am, I've checked 3 times. Your name isn't on the list. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside so I can help other guests. Just give me a moment to find the email. Security. The woman raised her hand, her voice calm but firm. We need assistance at registration. The heat of humiliation burned up my neck despite the November cold. I stepped to the side, fumbling with my phone, my fingers clumsy as I tried to pull up my email app. Around me, other guests flowed past, their invitations accepted, their names checked off, their belonging confirmed while I stood there like a beggar at the gates. A laugh cut through the noise. Crystal sharp. Deliberately loud. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was, but I did anyway. Diane stood 20 feet behind me, surrounded by her usual entourage. My ex-mother-in-law wore burgundy silk and enough diamonds to fund Linda's college education. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant chignon, her makeup flawless, her smile absolutely vicious as she watched me being turned away from the gala. The gala she chaired. The gala she deliberately erased my name from. Our eyes met across the crowd. Her smile widened. The security guard arrived at my elbow, young and professional, his hand hovering near his radio. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. If you'd like to dispute the guest list, you can contact the foundation office on Monday." Monday. When everyone inside would be talking about the gala, sharing photos, reliving the evening. When I'd be at school teaching fractions while Linda asked why we couldn't go to the fancy party Grandpa helped make. "Please," I whispered, hating myself for begging. "My father founded this organization. I have an invitation. This is just a mistake. Step away from the entrance, please." The guard's hand settled on my arm, gentle but insistent. I could see Diane smile from the corner of my eye. Could feel the stares of guests who'd paused their conversations to watch the scene unfold. Could taste the bitter reality that no matter how many times I'd attended this gala as a child holding my father's hand, as a teenager volunteering at the silent auction, as Richard's wife smiling for photos, I didn't belong here anymore. I'd become the charity case my father had devoted his life to helping. That's when a hand settled on the small of my back. Warm. Strong. Heavy with an authority that made the security guard immediately step back. "She's with me." The voice came from behind me, deep and smooth with an edge that suggested it wasn't accustomed to being questioned. I turned, my heart hammering, and looked up into the most striking face I'd ever seen. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers or movie screens. Sharp jawline. Eyes so dark they were almost black, watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. His suit was blue and fit him like it had been made specifically for his body, which it probably had. Everything about him screamed power and money and danger. Earl Patterson. I knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. Real estate developer. Philanthropist. The man whose face appeared in business sections and society pages with equal frequency. The man who donated enough to the Aurora Foundation to get his name on a wing of the new clinic. The man rumored to have connections that went far beyond legitimate business dealings. He was looking at me like he knew me. Like we'd planned this. "Mr. George." The registration woman's voice had transformed, all traces of impatience replaced with deference. "We didn't realize this guest was with you. My apologies for the confusion." "Not your fault, Madison." His hand remained on my back, proprietary and protective simultaneously. "Last-minute arrangement. Add her to my table." "Of course. Right away." She was already typing, her fingers flying across the tablet. "May I have the name again?" "Tracey Messer." Earl said it before I could, his pronunciation perfect. His hand pressed slightly more firmly against my back, a silent instruction to stay quiet and follow his lead. The security guard had already disappeared. The woman handed me a name badge with a smile that had thawed completely. "Enjoy your evening, Ms. Messer. Mr. George, your table is number 3, as always. Table 3. Front and center. The tables reserved for the foundation's biggest donors and board members. The tables I used to sit at as a child, before I became the embarrassment my ex-in-laws wanted to hide. Earl guided me through the doors and into the warmth of the Sinclair's lobby. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over marble floors and Art Deco details. The crowd inside was even more polished than the ones outside, champagne glasses already in hand, conversations flowing with the ease of people who knew they belonged. He leaned down, his mouth close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "You're with me tonight. Act like my date, and we'll both get what we need." Before we dive deeper into Tracey's story, I want to welcome you to our community of story lovers. If you're someone who believes in second chances and the power of finding your strength in unexpected places, subscribe and join us. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in Tracey's position. Now, let's continue. Then he straightened, his hands still on my back, and guided me into a world where I absolutely did not belong. The warmth of the Sinclair lobby wrapped around me like a physical thing after the bitter wind outside. Earl Patterson's hand remained steady on my back as he guided me through the crowd, his presence creating a path where moments before I'd been invisible. People stepped aside without him asking, their eyes tracking our movement with curiosity and something that looked like calculation. I caught a glimpse of Diane's face as we passed. The satisfaction had drained away, replaced by shock and fury barely contained beneath her practiced smile. She started to move toward us, but Earl didn't acknowledge her, simply steered me deeper into the ballroom with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. The grand ballroom opened before us in a sweep of crystal and gold. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from ceilings painted with classical frescoes. Round tables draped in champagne linens filled the space, each one centered with towering arrangements of white roses and orchids that probably cost more than my monthly salary. A string quartet played near the far wall, their music weaving through conversations that hummed with money and influence. Earl led me to a table directly in front of the stage where the Foundation's logo glowed on a massive screen. Table 3. I recognized some of the names on the place cards. A state senator. The CEO of a pharmaceutical company. A renowned cardiac surgeon. And at the head of the table, 2 cards side by side. Earl Patterson and guest. He pulled out a chair for me with old-world courtesy that seemed at odds with everything else about him. As I sat, he leaned down again, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. Smile like you're happy to be here. In about 30 seconds, people are going to start coming over to say hello, and you need to look like this is exactly where you planned to be all along. I don't understand why you're doing this. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Because I need them to think I'm here with someone who matters to me, and you need to not be humiliated by your former family. He straightened, his hand briefly touching my shoulder. Just follow my lead and look like you want to be here. Can you do that? I thought about Diane's face. About the registration woman's pity. About Linda asking tomorrow if I'd gone to the party Grandpa made. About my father, who'd taught me that dignity wasn't something other people could give or take away. Yes. I met his dark eyes. I can do that. His smile was slow and dangerous and absolutely devastating. Good. Because here comes the first test. I turned to see my ex-husband Richard approaching, Vanessa beside him, both of them staring at me like I'd materialized from thin air at the table they'd specifically arranged for me to never reach. Richard stopped 3 feet from our table, his expression caught between confusion and something darker. Vanessa clutched his arm, her free hand resting on her pregnant belly in that way she had of reminding everyone she'd given him what I couldn't. More children. The possibility of a son to carry on the family name. Jessica. Richard's voice carried across the space between us. I didn't realize you'd be attending. Earl stood before I could respond, his movement fluid and deliberate. He extended his hand to Richard with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power he held in any room. Earl Patterson. You must be the ex-husband I've heard about. The emphasis on ex was subtle but unmistakable. Richard shook his hand because refusing would have caused a scene, but I could see the way his jaw tightened. Vanessa's eyes darted between Earl and me, trying to calculate what was happening. We weren't aware Jessica was seeing anyone. Vanessa's tone suggested she didn't believe it even as she said it. We've been keeping things quiet. Earl's hand found my shoulder again, possessive and protective. Tracey values her privacy. As do I. The use of my actual name instead of Jessica, the name Richard's family had always insisted on, felt like a small rebellion. Earl pulled out his phone, glanced at it with practiced disinterest, then looked at Richard with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. You'll have to excuse us. The foundation director wants to discuss the new pediatric wing. He guided me away before either of them could respond, his hand sliding to the small of my back as we moved through the crowd. People called out greetings to him. He acknowledged them with nods, brief words, always keeping us moving. A congressman. A appeals court judge. The owner of the city's largest construction firm. He knew them all, spoke to them with the ease of someone who understood exactly where he stood in the hierarchy. When Diane intercepted us near the silent auction tables, her smile was razor sharp. "Earl, darling. I didn't know you were bringing a guest this year. If I'd known, would have seated you at a larger table. The table is perfect, Diane." His tone was pleasant, but something in it made her smile falter. Though I did notice Tracey's name missing from the registration list. I assume that was an oversight that won't happen again. It wasn't a question. Diane's face went carefully blank. Of course. Just a computer error. You know how these systems can be. I'm sure. Earl glanced at his watch. We should take our seats. I believe dinner service is about to begin. As we walked away, I felt Diane's eyes boring into my back. Earl leaned down, his breath warm against my ear. She won't touch you again. Not while you're with me. Why are you helping me? The question escaped before I could stop it. Because I need people to believe I'm interested in someone, and you need to prove you still belong here. He pulled out my chair as we reached the table. We're using each other. There's nothing wrong with that. The lights dimmed as the foundation director took the stage. Earl settled into his seat beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Around us, Chicago's elite prepared to celebrate their generosity while the man beside me played a game I didn't fully understand. But for the first time since my divorce, I wasn't standing on the outside looking in. I was at table 3, and everyone was watching. My phone started buzzing at 6:15 in the morning, the vibrations rattling against my nightstand loud enough to wake me from restless sleep. I'd gotten home past midnight, paid Mrs. Chin double her usual rate, and collapsed into bed still wearing the thrift store gown that now smelled faintly of Earl Patterson's cologne. The first message was from my cousin Beth. Just a link, no explanation. I clicked it with sleep-blurred eyes and felt my stomach drop. Chicago Tribune Society page. The headline read, "Mystery Woman Captures Earl Patterson's Attention at Aurora Foundation Gala." Below it, a photo of us on the dance floor. His hand on my waist. My head tilted up toward his face. The way the photographer had captured it made us look like lovers sharing secrets, not strangers playing roles. The messages kept coming. My college roommate. A teacher from school. My sister-in-law who hadn't spoken to me since the divorce. Each one with a link to a different site. Chicago social scene. Elite events blog. North Shore magazine. All featuring variations of the same photo, all speculating about who I was and what my connection to Earl Patterson meant. I scrolled through the comments with growing dread. Some called me beautiful. Others wondered if I was a model or socialite they'd somehow missed. A few recognized my last name, connected me to my father, asked if I was Robert Messer's daughter returning to the social scene. But underneath the polite speculation ran a darker current. Gold digger. Social climber. One comment asked how much he was paying me. Linda knocked on my bedroom door at 6:45, already dressed in her school uniform, her backpack decorated with unicorn patches slung over one shoulder. "Mama, you're going to be late." I shoved the phone under my pillow and forced a smile. "Give me 5 minutes, baby." The photos followed me through my morning routine. More messages. A voicemail from Diane that I deleted without listening to. An email from someone claiming to be a lifestyle reporter asking for an interview. By the time I'd gotten Linda to school and was driving toward Lincoln Park Academy, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. That's when I noticed the black SUV. It appeared 2 blocks from Linda's school, sliding into traffic 3 cars behind me with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. Tinted windows. No front plate. It maintained the exact same distance as I turned onto Clark Street, stayed with me when I took the long way past the coffee shop I sometimes stopped at, followed me all the way to the school parking lot. I sat in my car watching it idle at the curb across the street. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Ms. Messer. The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. Mr. George would like to speak with you today. His driver will pick you up at 3:30 from Lincoln Park Academy. Please be ready. The line went dead. The SUV's engine hummed steadily in the cold morning air. I was no longer playing a role. I was already in too deep. The black SUV was waiting exactly where the voice on the phone had promised when I walked out of Lincoln Park Academy at 3:30. My students' parents had stared at it during pickup, their whispers following me across the parking lot. Mrs. Patterson, who taught 5th grade, had pulled me aside to ask if everything was all right. I'd lied and said it was fine. The driver opened the back door without a word. Inside, Earl sat with his phone in hand, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked up as I slid in, his expression unreadable. We need to talk. About the photos. I kept my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. I saw them. All of them. The photos are a problem, but not the one I'm concerned about. He pocketed his phone and leaned forward. Driver, take us to Ms. Messer's apartment. The SUV pulled smoothly into traffic. I watched the school disappear behind us, replaced by the familiar streets of my neighborhood. Lincoln Park gave way to less polished blocks where the buildings were older and the cars parked at meters had seen better days. I don't understand what's happening. I turned to face him. You said last night we were using each other. One evening. That was the deal. The deal changed when Konstantin Volkov's people started asking questions about you. The name meant nothing to me. Earl must have seen the confusion on my face because he continued, his voice dropping lower. Volkov runs an organization that competes with certain business interests I'm involved in. He saw the photos. Now he thinks you matter to me. Which makes you valuable to him. I don't matter to you. We barely know each other. He doesn't know that. Earl watched me with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. And until I can make him understand you're off limits, you need protection. The SUV pulled up in front of my building, a 3-story walk-up with chipped paint and a front door that didn't lock properly. Earl looked at it with an expression I couldn't read, then gestured to the man in the front passenger seat. Marco, with us. Marco was built like a wall, all shoulders, and controlled power in a black suit. He followed us up the 2 flights of stairs to my apartment, his eyes constantly scanning. I fumbled with my keys, hyper-aware of the peeling wallpaper in the hallway and the way my neighbor's television blared through thin walls. Inside, my apartment looked even smaller with Earl and Marco filling the space. Second-hand furniture. Linda's drawings taped to the refrigerator. The stack of bills on the kitchen counter I'd been avoiding. Earl walked to the window overlooking the street, pulled back the curtain, studied the view. How long have you lived here? 4 years. Since the divorce. I set my bag down, crossed my arms. What kind of protection are you talking about? My estate in Lake Forest. Gated. Secure. You and your daughter stay there until I can negotiate with Volkov. Absolutely not. The words came out harder than I intended. I'm not uprooting Linda because you decided to play hero at a gala. Marco's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at Earl. Something passed between them, silent and tense. Ms. Messer. Marco's voice was surprisingly gentle. You should come see your car. The brake lines hung loose beneath my Honda Civic, cut clean through. Marco crouched beside the wheel well, his phone flashlight illuminating the damage while Earl stood behind me, solid and silent. Professional job, Marco said. Done sometime in the last few hours. I stared at the severed lines and thought about Linda in her booster seat. About the highway I took to her school every morning. About what would have happened if I'd driven this car tomorrow. Earl's hand touched my elbow. Pack what you need for a week. We leave in 30 minutes. This time, I didn't argue. The gates to Earl's Lake Forest estate were 12 feet of wrought iron backed by stone walls that disappeared into landscape darkness. They opened silently as the SUV approached, closing behind us with a finality that made my chest tighten. Linda pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she took in the long driveway lined with oak trees and landscape lighting. Mama, is this a castle? It's a house, baby. But even I couldn't keep the awe from my voice as the main building came into view. 3 stories of limestone and glass, illuminated by soft exterior lights that made it glow against the night sky. Wings extended from either side of the central structure, and I could see the dark shimmer of a pool to the left, covered for winter. Earl had been silent during the drive north from the city, his attention divided between his phone and the window. Now he looked at Linda with an expression I couldn't read. There's a pool. It's heated. You can swim tomorrow if you'd like. Linda's eyes went wide. She looked at me for permission, and I managed a nod even though nothing about this felt real. We'd left our apartment with 2 hastily packed duffel bags while Marco arranged for someone to watch the place. Mrs. Chen had taken Linda's goldfish and promised to water my one struggling houseplant. I'd called the school to say we'd be away for a family emergency. The lies had come easier than I'd expected. The inside of the house was worse than the exterior. Marble floors. A curved staircase with an iron railing. Art on the walls that looked like it belonged in museums. A woman in her 50s appeared from somewhere deeper in the house, her gray hair pulled back, her smile warm and practiced. This is Elena, Earl said. She manages the household staff. Elena, this is Tracey Messer and her daughter Linda. They'll be staying in the East Wing guest suite. Of course, Mr. George. Elena's eyes softened as she looked at Linda. I've prepared the room with the window seat. I thought a young lady might enjoy that. The guest suite was larger than my entire apartment. 2 bedrooms connected by a sitting area with a fireplace that actually worked. Linda's room had the promised window seat overlooking the grounds, plus a 4-poster bed with a canopy and enough pillows to build a fort. She dropped her backpack and ran to the window, her exhaustion forgotten in the face of wonder. Can I really swim tomorrow? If your mother says yes. Earl stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, looking oddly out of place in his own house. Dinner is in an hour. Elena will show you the dining room when you're ready. He started to leave, but Linda's voice stopped him. Are you Mama's boyfriend? The silence stretched between us. I opened my mouth to explain, to deflect, but Earl knelt down to Linda's eye level with unexpected grace. I'm your mother's friend. And I'm going to make sure both of you are safe. Is that okay? Linda studied him with the solemn seriousness only 8-year-olds could manage, then nodded. Okay. But you should know Mama doesn't like it when people lie to her. Earl's eyes flicked to mine, something dark and amused in their depths. I'll remember that. Dinner was served in a formal dining room with a table that could seat 20. Elena had set 3 places at one end, close enough to feel intimate despite the cavernous space. Linda sat between Earl and me, her legs swinging as she took in the crystal chandelier and the oil paintings of people she didn't recognize. Earl asked her about school. About her favorite subjects. About the unicorn patches on her backpack. He listened to her answers with attention that seemed genuine, asking follow-up questions that made her light up. When she talked about the chapter book her teacher was reading to the class, something about a girl who discovered she was secretly a princess, Earl smiled. I might have that book in the library. We could check after dinner. You have a library? Linda's fork clattered against her plate. 3 rooms of books. Some of them are very old, but there's a section that might interest you. After dinner, Linda could barely sit still as Earl led us down a hallway lined with more art to a set of double doors. The library beyond was exactly what I'd imagined and nothing I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, a rolling ladder, leather chairs positioned near windows that overlooked the dark grounds. But in the corner, almost hidden, was a smaller bookcase filled with brightly colored spines. Earl pulled out a book. The same one Linda's teacher had been reading. This one? Linda nodded, suddenly shy. It was past her bedtime, her eyes heavy despite her excitement. I started to suggest we save it for tomorrow, but Earl was already settling into one of the leather chairs, the book open in his hands. Chapter 7, right? Where Princess Arya discovers the secret passage. Linda curled up in the chair beside him, her head resting against the leather armrest. Earl began to read, his voice steady and warm, nothing like the clipped tones he'd used with Marco or the cold authority he'd wielded with Diane. I stood in the doorway, watching this powerful man read about princesses and secret passages to my daughter, and felt something shift in my chest that I didn't want to name. By the time he finished the chapter, Linda was asleep. Earl closed the book carefully and looked at me across the room. I can carry her upstairs if you'd like. I should have said no. Should have maintained the boundary between us, kept this transactional and clear. But I was tired, and Linda was heavy when she was sleeping, and something about the way he'd read to her made me nod. He lifted her with unexpected gentleness, her head falling against his shoulder as he carried her through the halls to the east wing. I followed, watching the way he navigated the stairs without jostling her, the way he waited while I pulled back the covers before laying her down. Linda didn't wake when I removed her shoes or when I pulled the blanket up to her chin. Earl stepped back, giving me space for my goodnight kiss. When I straightened, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "Thank you," I whispered. "For reading to her. My mother used to read that book to me." He moved toward the door. "Get some rest, Tracey. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to end this." He left before I could respond, his footsteps fading down the hallway. I stood in the doorway of Linda's new room with its window seat and canopy bed, looking at my daughter sleeping in a house protected by armed guards and surveillance systems, and wondered what exactly I'd agreed to when I'd packed those bags and followed Earl Patterson behind his iron gates. Earl told me about the dinner 3 days into our stay at the estate, his tone casual as he poured coffee in the kitchen where I'd found him at dawn. Linda was still asleep upstairs, and the house held that peculiar quiet of expensive spaces where sound didn't travel. "I'm hosting associates tonight. Business dinner. You don't have to attend, but it would help if you did." I wrapped my hands around the mug Elena had set out, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. "Help how?" "It reinforces what Volkov already believes. That you're important to me." He leaned against the counter, still in the shirt and slacks he'd worn yesterday, looking like he hadn't slept. "The more convinced he is, the more careful he'll be about making moves against you." So I became part of another performance. Elena helped me choose a dress from a selection that had appeared in my closet sometime during the previous 2 days. Emerald silk that fit like it had been made for me. She assured me it had been, that Earl employed people who could work that quickly. I tried not to think about what that meant, about the kind of man who could make a designer create a gown in 48 hours. The guests arrived at 7. Marco showed them into the formal dining room where the table had been set for 8. I recognized none of them, but Earl performed introductions with the ease of someone hosting a dinner party rather than whatever this actually was. Vincent Catalano, who owned half the commercial real estate in the south suburbs. James Chen, who Earl introduced as his financial advisor but whose eyes were too sharp for simple accounting. Anthony Russo and his wife Maria, both impeccably dressed, both watching me with open curiosity. And finally, a younger man Earl called his cousin, Daniel George, who had the same dark eyes and carried himself with the same coiled energy. The conversation flowed in 2 layers. On the surface, talk of investments and property developments and foundation work. Beneath it, something else entirely. References to territories and arrangements and understandings with other families. Vincent mentioned the docks and Earl responded with something about shipping schedules. James discussed cash flow in ways that made my teacher's understanding of finances feel laughably simple. Anthony asked about the Russians, and the table went quiet for 3 heartbeats before Earl said Volkov was being reasonable. I sat beside Earl, playing my role. Smiling at the right moments. Sipping wine I barely tasted. Watching Maria Russo study me like I was a puzzle she needed to solve. How did you and Earl meet? Maria asked during the second course, her voice friendly but her eyes calculating. At the Aurora Foundation Gala. The lie came easier now. He saved me from a difficult situation. Earl is good at that. Maria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Saving people who matter to him. After dinner, the men retreated to Earl's study while Maria made polite excuses about an early morning. Elena appeared to clear plates, and I found myself alone in the dining room staring at crystal glasses and wondering what I'd just witnessed. The study door opened an hour later. Voices in the hallway, goodbyes being exchanged. I stayed in the library where I'd been pretending to read, listening to cars pulling away down the long driveway. Footsteps approached, and Earl appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, exhaustion written across his features. You did well tonight. They know. I closed the book I hadn't been reading. They know I'm not really with you. They suspect. But they'll keep that suspicion to themselves because I want them to. He moved to the bar cart, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, downed it in one swallow. You should know what you're actually involved in, Tracey. What I actually am. You're not just a businessman. No. He poured another drink but didn't touch it. I'm the head of the George family operations. Real estate, yes. Legitimate businesses, absolutely. But also territories and arrangements and deals that don't get written in contracts lawyers can file. My father built this empire. I inherited it when he died 5 years ago. The word empire hung between us. I thought about the dinner conversation, the coded language, Marco's constant presence. The way people had stepped aside at the gala. The way Diane had backed down with a single look. You're telling me you're a criminal. I'm telling you I operate in spaces where the law is flexible and power matters more than morality. He finally looked at me. And I'm telling you that you can walk away right now. I'll still protect you and Linda. Still deal with Volkov. Still make sure Diane never threatens your custody again. But you don't have to stay here. Don't have to be part of this. I should have taken the offer. Should have grabbed Linda and run back to our small apartment and our small life where the biggest danger was unpaid bills and judgmental ex-in-laws. But I kept seeing him reading to Linda. Kept remembering the way he'd stood beside me at the gala, solid and unshakable. Kept feeling the weight of his hand on my back, protective and possessive. I crossed the study in 5 steps and kissed him. He froze for half a second, surprise flickering across his features before his hands came up to frame my face. The kiss deepened, urgent and reckless, his body solid against mine. I tasted whiskey and something darker, felt the controlled power in the way he pulled me closer. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes searched mine. That wasn't walking away. No, I whispered. It wasn't. His thumb traced my jaw. You understand what you're choosing. I understand that for the first time since my divorce, someone sees me as something other than a charity case or a mistake. I held his gaze. I understand that you read princess stories to my daughter and host dangerous men at your dinner table and somehow both of those things are equally true. And I understand that I'm already in too deep to pretend I want out. Earl kissed me again, slower this time, with an intensity that made my knees weak. When he pulled back, something had shifted in his expression. Not softer, exactly. But certain. Then you stay. And I keep you safe. Both of you. Okay. Tracey just crossed the point of no return. But choosing Earl's protection comes with a price she never imagined. If you're as invested in this family's survival as I am, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the terrifying moment that will test everything Tracey just decided. Trust me, you need to see what's coming. He kept his hands on my face a moment longer, then stepped back, creating space we both needed. I should check the perimeter with Marco. Can you find your way back to your room? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He left, and I stood alone in his study surrounded by leather-bound books and expensive art, tasting whiskey on my lips and knowing I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. I'd thought we were safe. That was my first mistake. Linda had been restless at the estate, missing her friends and her routine despite the pool and the library and Earl's patient answers to her endless questions. When she'd asked for the third morning in a row if she could go back to school, I'd looked at Earl across the breakfast table and seen something in his expression shift. One day, he'd said, "Marco will drive her. 2 of my men will stay on campus. She won't be out of their sight." So that morning I'd packed Linda's unicorn backpack and watched her climb into the back of the SUV with Marco, her excitement at seeing her friends overriding any fear. Earl had meetings in the city. I'd stayed at the estate with Elena, trying to grade papers and failing to focus on anything except the clock. The call came at 2:15. Marco's voice was clipped and professional, but I heard the sirens in the background. "Ms. Messer, there's been an incident at the school. Linda is safe. We're with her now. But you need to come." I didn't remember the drive. Earl's driver pushed the SUV through traffic while I gripped my phone, Marco's reassurances playing on repeat in my head. "She's safe. She's with us. She's not hurt." But the sirens kept wailing through the phone connection, and safe felt like a relative term. Lincoln Park Academy's parking lot looked like a crime scene because it was one. 3 police cars, lights flashing. An ambulance. Parents clustered near the building, their faces tight with fear and curiosity. And in the middle of it all, Marco standing beside a black sedan with its passenger door hanging open, his suit jacket torn, blood on his knuckles. I ran. Someone called my name but I didn't stop. Didn't slow until I reached Marco and saw past him to where Linda sat in the back of another SUV, wrapped in a security guard's jacket, her face streaked with tears. "Mama." Her voice broke on the word, and then she was in my arms, sobbing against my shoulder while I held her so tight I was afraid I'd hurt her. "What happened?" I looked at Marco over Linda's head. "What the hell happened?" 2 men approached her outside the east entrance during afternoon recess. Marco's voice was steady but his eyes were hard. They identified themselves as campus security, said you'd been in an accident and sent them to pick her up. Linda's teacher became suspicious when they couldn't produce proper identification. She activated the school's emergency protocol. My team intercepted them in the parking lot. This voice came from behind me. Earl, his presence sudden and solid, his own jacket missing and his shirt sleeve torn at the shoulder. They resisted. It got physical. The police have them in custody now. I turned to look at him, Linda still clinging to my neck. Earl's knuckles were split, blood dried dark against his skin. His hair was disheveled, his expression carved from stone. "Volkov's men?" The question came out steadier than I felt. "Yes." He moved closer, his hands settling on Linda's back, his eyes meeting mine over her head. "I'm sorry, Tracey. I thought we had more time. Thought he'd negotiate before escalating." A police officer approached, notepad in hand, questions forming on his lips. Earl handled him with quiet authority, providing statements that were truthful enough to satisfy without revealing anything that mattered. Marco did the same. The ambulance left without passengers, the excitement of attempted kidnapping already fading into paperwork and procedure. But Linda wouldn't stop shaking. She wouldn't let go of me. And when I finally carried her to the SUV for the drive back to the estate, she reached for Earl with her free hand. "Don't let them take me." Something cracked in Earl's expression. He took her small hand in his bloody one, his voice dropping to a register I'd never heard before. "No one takes you. Not ever. Do you understand me, Linda? I will burn down everything before I let anyone hurt you." She nodded against my shoulder, and Earl kept holding her hand during the entire drive north, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm while she finally stopped crying. That night, after Elena had made hot chocolate and Linda had fallen into exhausted sleep in my bed instead of her own, Earl found me standing at the window overlooking the dark grounds. I heard him enter but didn't turn around. This ends now. His voice was quiet but absolute. I'm done being careful. Done trying to negotiate. Volkov wanted to know if you mattered to me. Now he knows. And now he's going to learn what that costs. I turned to face him. He'd showered, changed clothes, but the split knuckles remained, and his eyes held something cold and final. What are you going to do? What I should have done the moment he started asking questions about you. Earl crossed the room, his hands settling on my shoulders. I'm going to remind Chicago why my family has held power for 3 generations. And I'm going to make sure Konstantin Volkov understands that touching what's mine is a mistake he doesn't get to make twice. I'm not yours. Yes, he said softly, his forehead resting against mine. You are. And so is she. And I protect what's mine. I should have been afraid of the promise in his voice. Should have recognized the danger in claiming us so completely. But all I felt was relief that someone finally cared enough to fight back. Make it end, I whispered. Whatever you have to do. Just make it end. Earl kissed my forehead, gentle despite everything. It's already done. The petition arrived by courier 3 days after the incident at Linda's school. I was in the library with Linda, helping her with homework while she half listened and kept glancing toward the windows. She'd been having nightmares. Wouldn't go anywhere without me or Earl. Elena had started sleeping in the sitting room between our bedrooms, and Marco now had a permanent post outside our wing. Earl appeared in the doorway, his expression dark as he held a manila envelope. We need to talk. Privately. Elena materialized as if summoned, offering to help Linda with her math worksheet. I followed Earl to his study, my stomach already knotting with dread. He closed the door and handed me the envelope without preamble. Diane filed for emergency custody this morning. Cook County Family Court. The hearing is in 4 days. My hands shook as I pulled out the papers. The petition was thick, professionally prepared, devastating in its detail. Exhibits attached. Photos of me entering Earl's estate. Surveillance images of Marco and his team outside Linda's school. News articles about the attempted kidnapping with Earl's name mentioned. Affidavits from Richard and Vanessa describing my unstable lifestyle and dangerous associations. The final exhibit was a police report identifying Earl as a person of interest in ongoing investigations into organized crime activities. They're calling you a criminal. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. They're saying I'm exposing Linda to danger by staying with you. They're not wrong. Earl leaned against his desk, his arms crossed. The police have been investigating my family's operations for years. They have no evidence that will hold up in court, but they have enough suspicion to make it part of public record. And Diane's lawyers know how to use that. I kept reading. The petition requested immediate temporary custody be granted to Richard and Vanessa, with supervised visitation for me pending a full custody evaluation. It painted me as a woman so desperate for security that I'd put my daughter in the path of violence and criminality. It referenced the attempted kidnapping as evidence that my choices had directly endangered Linda. They're using the men who tried to take her as proof I'm unfit. I looked up at Earl. They're twisting what happened into my fault. That's what lawyers do. He moved to the bar cart, poured whiskey he didn't drink. I have attorneys on retainer. The best in the state. They can bury this petition so deep Diane will regret filing it. But you need to understand what that means. What does it mean? It means I use every connection I have. Judges I've donated to. Politicians who owe me favors. Information about Richard's family that isn't public knowledge but should be. His eyes met mine. It means fighting dirty because Diane already is. It means winning at any cost because losing means Linda goes to people who erased you from a guest list just to humiliate you. And if I say no? If I walk away and fight this myself? Earl was quiet for a long moment. Then I make sure you have the best public defender available and keep my distance so Diane can't use me against you. You'd have a chance. Family courts favor mothers, and you've done nothing actually wrong. But it would be a fight, Tracey. Months of hearings and evaluations and Linda being questioned by strangers about whether she feels safe with you. I thought about Linda's nightmares. About the way she'd clung to both of us in the SUV. About Richard, who'd walked away when I was pregnant and now wanted to play father because it made him look good. About Diane, who deliberately removed my name from a guest list just to watch me suffer. If I let you help, I'm admitting we're together. Really together. Not just pretending for Volkov. Yes. And I'm accepting that your world comes with consequences. That men like Volkov exist and will always see Linda and me as leverage. Yes. Earl set down the untouched whiskey and crossed to where I stood. But you're also accepting that I have the power to protect you from those consequences. That my connections and my resources and my willingness to do whatever it takes means Linda stays with you. Safely. Permanently. You're asking me to choose between being independent and being protected. No. His hand cupped my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. I'm asking you to choose between fighting alone with limited resources or fighting as part of something bigger. You don't stop being who you are because you let me help. You become harder to hurt. I looked down at the petition in my hands. At Diane's signature. At the affidavits that twisted truth into weapons. At the photos of me entering a world I'd never imagined belonging to. Then I looked at Earl, this dangerous man who read bedtime stories to my daughter and broke bones to keep her safe and was offering to burn down anyone who tried to take her from me. Call your attorneys, I said. Use every connection you have. Do whatever it takes. You're sure? Diane made me stand outside that gala like I was nothing. Like my father's legacy meant nothing. Like I deserved to be erased. I met his eyes. I'm done being the one who gets erased. Linda deserves better than that. So do I. Earl kissed me, hard and possessive, the petition crumpling between us. When he pulled back, his expression had shifted into something cold and final. Then let's show them what happens when they come after what's mine. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. By the time Linda finished her homework, Earl had assembled a legal team that would make Diane's attorneys look like amateurs. And I'd crossed the final line between my old life and this new one. There was no going back now. Only forward, into whatever came next. The hearing lasted 47 minutes. Earl's lead attorney, a woman named Catherine Brennan who wore Chanel suits and had argued before the Supreme Court, systematically destroyed Diane's petition with the precision of a surgeon. She presented financial records showing Richard's gambling debts and Vanessa's 3 DUIs that had been quietly buried. She brought in Linda's therapist, who testified that Linda felt safer now than she had in months. She introduced affidavits from my principal and colleagues describing my dedication as a teacher and mother. And when Diane's attorney tried to use the attempted kidnapping as evidence of danger, Catherine calmly pointed out that Earl's security team had prevented the crime while Richard and Vanessa had been at brunch, unreachable. The judge denied the emergency custody petition before Diane's lawyer finished his closing argument. I watched her face crumble from across the courtroom, watched Richard refuse to meet my eyes, watched their expensive attorneys pack their briefcases with the knowledge they'd been outmaneuvered at every turn. Outside the courthouse, Earl's hand found mine. It's done. She can't touch Linda now without going through a full custody trial, and her attorneys have already advised her she'd lose. But Volkov was a different problem entirely. Earl left the estate that night with Marco and 4 other men, dressed in a suit that cost more than my car and carrying himself like a man going to war. I didn't ask where he was going. Didn't need to. The answer was in the set of his shoulders and the cold finality in his eyes when he'd kissed me goodbye. He returned at dawn, his knuckles bruised but his expression satisfied. When I asked if it was over, he simply said, "Volkov understands now. He won't make the same mistake twice." I learned later from Marco, who'd had too much whiskey one evening, what that meant. Earl had assembled the heads of Chicago's 5 most powerful families in a warehouse on the south side. He'd presented evidence of Volkov's attempted kidnapping, called it a violation of established protocols, and asked for a vote. The families had voted unanimously. Volkov was given 48 hours to leave Chicago or face consequences that were outlined in explicit detail. Volkov left. His organization dissolved into smaller operations that knew better than to target Earl Patterson's family. 2 months later, I stood in the back of Lincoln Park Academy's auditorium watching Linda perform in the winter concert. She wore the white dress Elena had bought her, her hair in careful braids I'd learned to do from YouTube tutorials. She sang with her class about snowflakes and winter wonderland, and she kept looking past the stage lights to where Earl and I sat together in the 3rd row. He'd been coming to more events. Parent-teacher conferences. Linda's soccer games. The fall festival where he'd won her an enormous stuffed bear at the ring toss. People had stopped whispering about us. Or maybe I'd just stopped caring about the whispers. After the concert, we took Linda for hot chocolate at the diner on Clark Street she loved. She sat between us in the booth, chocolate smeared on her upper lip, talking about how nervous she'd been and how she'd seen us in the audience and felt better. Earl listened with the same attention he gave to business meetings, asking questions that made her light up. In the parking lot, Linda ran ahead to the car while Earl and I walked more slowly through the December cold. He stopped me under the glow of a streetlight, his hands settling on my waist. "I have something for you." He pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket. My heart stuttered as he opened it to reveal a ring. Not a modern diamond, but an antique sapphire surrounded by smaller stones, the band clearly old and carefully maintained. This was my mother's. His voice was steady but his eyes held something vulnerable. She wore it for 43 years until the day she died. My father gave it to me and told me to save it for someone who mattered. Someone who'd understand what it meant to be part of this family. Earl. I'm not asking you to marry me because it's convenient or because it helps with custody or because Volkov is gone and Diane is neutered. He took the ring from the box, held it between us. I'm asking because Linda calls my name when she has nightmares and you're the first person I want to see in the morning and I can't imagine my life without both of you in it. I'm asking because you chose to stay when you could have run. Because you're stronger than anyone I've ever known. Because you're already my family, and I want to make it official. Behind us, Linda's voice called out from the car. Mama, are you coming? I looked at the ring. At this man who'd saved me from humiliation and then saved my daughter from actual danger. Who'd read bedtime stories and broken bones and used his power to protect us without asking anything in return except that we stay. Who'd given me back my dignity and shown me that accepting help wasn't weakness. Yes. The word came out steady and certain. Yes, I'll marry you. Earl slid the ring onto my finger, kissed me in the glow of streetlight and winter cold. When we broke apart, Linda was standing beside the car, watching us with wide eyes. Did Earl just ask you to marry him? I knelt down to her level, showed her the ring. He did. What do you think about that? Linda looked at the ring, then at Earl, then at me. Her expression was serious, thoughtful in the way she got when making big decisions. Does that mean he'll live with us forever? Yes, Earl said, moving to kneel beside me. That's exactly what it means. And he'll come to my stuff at school? Every single thing. Linda bit her lip, then looked at Earl with those serious eyes. Can I call you Dad? I watched Earl's expression crack, watched this powerful man who commanded rooms full of dangerous people get undone by an 8-year-old girl asking for permission to love him. He pulled Linda into his arms, held her tight enough that I could see his shoulders shake. I would be honored if you called me Dad. Linda wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered something in his ear I couldn't hear. But I saw his face when she said it, saw the way he held her tighter, and I knew that whatever happened next, whatever challenges came, we'd face them as what we'd become. A family. Real and permanent and ours. From humiliation at the Gala gates to a family forged in fire and protected by power. If stories like this, where underdogs find their strength and broken pieces become whole, are what you live for. Subscribe right now. I've got more stories that will grab your heart and not let go. What did you think of Tracey and Earl's journey? Drop your thoughts below.